Now, in the beginning of this pandemic, if that's something that you want to call it, I had, well, not the beginning. Well, yeah, the beginning. The beginning. Certainly when it touched down in America, and you saw that there was this big obsession with masks out of nowhere, and of course, you were not allowed to question what the tactic was when it came to handling this. And I just want to reiterate just one more time for you guys that weren't following us, certainly back in March, and rather going into April as well, as for example, the Faucis of the world and the public experts began to shift. They went from you should not be wearing a mask to, okay, wear a mask, and you have to wear a mask. You have to wear a diaper on your face. I want to remind you guys, and Ben Swan actually did a great, like, more longer form, which I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I only have a slight segment to do it, but he did a longer form pulling up all these different studies prior to the pandemic, as well as a couple that happened earlier on in it. But science is not this like concrete kind of thing, which unfortunately it's been treated as because it's more political than anything. Whereas it's like, okay, if it comes from a person in a lab coat that works for a certain institution, albeit the government, and they confirm it, then it has to be right. And obviously that's not how science has ever worked, but let them tell it does. So if you question them, or if you're even an expert in the same field and have just as much learned as everybody else, they still will treat you as if you were just some quack scientist because there's only one acceptable opinion. But I remind you that when it came to the Modelo virus 19, like, there was no prior to, let's not like just say Modelo 19 in addition to other definitely upper respiratory illnesses or viruses. There was no let's just say this. It wasn't conclusive by any means that masks, certainly cloth ones, were just effective in terms of, let's say, permitting some sort of a transmission. I know people say, well, why do doctors and such wear it? And they completely just throw out the window the logic behind when doctors were using these masks and what kind of mask that they were generally using. And obviously, those were not the controlled environments that most people are sitting in. Even when you went to the doctor's office back before all of this went down, most of you understand that you would go see your doctor and your doctor wouldn't have a mask. Maybe if he was on the operating table or something like that. But if you went to the doctor, for the most part, nurses, none of them, nurse practitioners, or the doctors were not covering their faces when you were going for something, unless you may be getting an operation or something. And maybe that's different. But for the most part, you're going to see them, definitely if it was in a checkup or something, they weren't wearing masks. Right. And again, in addition to that, you have to take into consideration a controlled environment. But that wasn't what we were dealing with here. When it came to the pandemic, it was, okay, anything to cover your face, cloth, mask, or what have you. And when it came to that, the studies that have been done around masks, they were not conclusive, is the way I need to word it. As opposed to just saying it was one way or the other, there was no solid proof, no consensus at all that mask, definitely in the environment that we're talking about, people walking around just being normal people, aided in or made a significant difference, meaningful difference when it came to stopping any sort of spread of any upper respiratory illness. We talked about the Danish study, which is one of the first ones, if not the only one to this date, as it pertains to this virus. Being done and it coming up with similar things, basically saying it's statistically almost insignificant in terms of it catching it versus not catching it, or passing it versus not passing it. Covering a mask. A lot of what the studies that they utilized were based on using mannequins and 3D models and stuff. But I just wanted to remind you of that because a lot of folks lose sight of that. When they try to gaslight you now, when you say, well, why are we doing all of this? None of this really makes a lot of sense. We need to keep in mind, and you guys need to remember that that was a pivot, and they pivoted during this, right? Remember with your Surgeon General, as well as like the Faucis of the world, when you remember the beginning of the pandemic, they were telling you not to wear one. And all of a sudden, it just changed. Here's another example of another study that I wanted to bring up to you guys. I can't remember. I believe these guys are out of if I'm not mistaken, the University of Louisville, if I'm not mistaken. But this is Damian Guerrero and Daniel Guerrero. And they're talking about mask mandate and use efficiency in the state level COVID-19. You'll be able to see the full text if you want to go grab that. Again, that's Damian, D-A-M-I-A-N-D Guerrero and Daniel D. Guerrero. One's looks like, where are they both at? Yeah, University of Louisville. That's where Department of Biology. Okay, cool. And Daniel Guerrero, I don't know if it's his brother or they just happen to have the same name. Authentic biochemistry, it says. Okay, so these are what some of the experts had come to a conclusion. Let's read the background. Containment of the COVID-19 pandemic requires evidence-based strategies to reduce transmission because COVID-19 can spread via respired droplets. Many states have mandated masks in public setting. Randomized controlled trials have not clearly demonstrated mask efficiency against respiratory viruses, and observational studies conflict on whether mask use predicts lower infection rates. And I'm glad they said that right out the gate with the background stuff, because when I said this, a lot of folks called me crazy. But remember, I don't have a red tie and a lab coat, even though I'm looking at the same data that they're goddamn providing. That was the point that I was making. There have not really been any random control trials surrounding not just this virus, but viruses that are very similar to it that confirm the efficiency of the mask. There hasn't been. And again, there was one that was recently done, again, a Danish study, and it didn't come to the conclusion that the masks were efficient at all. And I'm glad they prefaced it by saying that, at least, which is a more proper way to use to word it. Less about, okay, it don't work, and less, it's less about that and more about, well, there's no confirmation that it does. There's no proof that it does. We hypothesize that statewide mask mandates and mask use are associated with lower COVID-19 case rates in the United States. So they preface it by saying that, okay, they hypothesize, that the mask mandates and the mask usage means lower cases when it comes to Modelo 19. So the methods, we calculated total COVID-19 case growth and mask use for continental United States with data from, they got the data directly from the CDC. So YouTube, as you hear me say all of these things, please take that into consideration. And the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, the IHME. We estimated post-mask mandate case growth in non-mandate states use median issuance dates of neighboring states with mandates. Okay, so here's what the results were. Case growth was not significantly different between mandate and non-mandate states at a low or high transmission rates. And surges were equivocal. Mask use predicted lower case growth at low, but not at high transmission rates. Growth rates were comparable between states in the first and last mask use quintiles, adjusted for normalized total cases early in the pandemic and unadjusted after peak fall winter infections. Mask use did not predict summer 2020 case growth for non-Northeast states or fall winter 2020 growth for all continental states. Conclusions. This is what the conclusions say. Mask mandates and use are not associated, with slower state level COVID-19 spread during the COVID-19 growth surges. So I'm going to repeat that one more time. Mask mandates and use are not associated with slower state level COVID-19 spread during the COVID-19 growth surges. Containment requires future research and implementation of existing efficacious strategies. Now, that's what their conclusions were. You've seen similar conclusions with some of the ones that did, again, attempt to definitely with the random control trials, attempt to find out whether or not mask mandates. And if I'm not mistaken, on the full text of this, you can read where, yes, it was like a lot of the usage, obviously with mandates, rates went up, but it didn't necessarily mean that there were less cases. You know, they love your cases. And this is why I had said early on that a lot of this just felt like we were just going through the motions. We're just going through the motions. Like this was more about, when it came to the mask, giving some people some sense of comfort. Because what it did was it like got people thinking that we're okay. I am able to at least do my part and I'm able to combat this. Despite if it worked or not is a completely different thing, which again, they'll still be studying this for a minute. Again, it's less about, okay, it didn't work, and more about, well, your evidence is not, there's no conclusive evidence that you can come to, like, you can make a positive claim of the mask and their efficiency. You can say it, but that doesn't mean that it's true. So you could say it's the science. Well, the actual science has not come to that conclusion. Even the one where they thought they did, I can't remember. We did it was a segment on it on one of these shows. And those groups of scientists, epidemiologists had to pull the study. They had to retract the study because they jumped the gun. They were so itching. They wanted to prove that this was the case. And they prematurely published this information, and then they had to come back. Because all this does, this study right here isn't news. We've already seen other studies that have confirmed, even before this pandemic was a thing. Again, when it comes to similar viruses, the same thing. It's like, well, it's not equal. It's less about confirming that it doesn't work and more about, again, saying that there's no proof that it does, if that makes sense. So again, a lot of places it just seemed like this was more of an implementation, and they knew this, but they wanted to make you feel some sort of sense of comfort because they scared you to death, and that you could cover your face and you can at least do something, whether it granted you immunity or you were not going to be the one spreading it to other people. And a lot of folks believed it, and I guess it did because they were scared to death. It gave them some sort of sense of comfort. But keep in mind that just because you view it as one thing does not mean that that's what it is. So I just wanted to point that out there. This will get peer reviewed, much like the others. And again, this is not news. What I'm showing you is just yet another one. This isn't news. Studies have been coming to a similar conclusion, at least when it comes to how efficient the masks are as it pertains to spreading the virus, have said much of the same thing. You just watched a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake. Catch us live at 12 p.m. throughout the week over at youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and follow us over at odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. If you want to watch the entire video cast after the show is over, just be sure to become a member on the YouTube channel. Of course, the full audio portion of the podcast is available for free on all major digital platforms, or just visit forcanonsake.com.